right, Dan Tankerous. Hey, we are in the Dun.
In the Dunny.
It's good to see you.
Crocodile Dundee?
Dundee. Crocodile Dundee.
Dundee.
Yeah. Man, so it's good to be back in the Dun. We got an interview on tap today. It's been a long time.
It has. It's been a long time since we're going beyond flag.
It's been a long time. And the people voted. And we left it up to the coin.
The people voted. We got the Abraham Lincoln made the decision, releasing the Beyond flag. Yeah.
Before we get there, though, I got some nice shouts.
Oh, yeah. Some nice shouts?
I got some nice shouts.
Yeah.
Yeah. First off, I got to shout out Lux. We just went over there. My head is spinning.
So Mrs. Be Nice treated the two of us yahoos to some Lux.
Yeah.
Just a winning combo. How patient is she? And how generous is she?
Yeah.
To go over there with us and then to treat us to some Lux.
She puts up with a lot of horse crap. And then so she bought you a brownie and I got an Americano. I don't know how you feel, but man, my head is spinning right now.
Yeah.
Zzz. So shout out to Mama B, to Jamie for treating us to some Lux, and then shout out to the homies at Lux.
Yeah.
Especially the person who knows that my name starts with a C.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. She doesn't know your name, but she knows it starts with a C, and you have absolutely no clue what her name is.
Correct.
So she's doing a lot better than you.
Yeah. Her job is to ask me my name. When I place an order, right?
Your job as a human maybe to also know her name.
To reciprocate?
Yeah.
Funny you ask. What is your name?
Yeah, will you start doing that?
I'll do it.
Coffee shops. Yeah.
You can just write Cody on there. But what is your name first?
Funny you ask.
Yeah.
Funny you ask.
My name. Oh, geez.
Okay.
How many listeners have tuned out by now?
All of them.
I think so, down to 0 from 1.
Whatever we were at.
We were at 2.
I can tell you what it's at now.
Yeah. I think this is why the quick and nerdy voters were like so emphatic in their votes.
Okay. So shout out. So we shout out Lux. Shout out Mrs. Be Nice.
Shout out Jamie Be Nice. And man, so something that's been really big in our community. So local ultra runner and athlete Tommy Rivers Puzzi has been hospitalized, right?
Yeah.
And so he came down with, or has contracted, was it NK T-cell lymphoma, I believe.
Yeah.
Primary pulmonary.
It's just an icon of our community.
Yeah, an absolute staple. And so something that, our thoughts go out to Tommy and his family and now, but something that I've been able to observe and we've been able to participate in is sort of how the community has gathered around and rallied for Tommy and his family.
Yeah.
For Steph and the girls. And so just a couple days ago, Pizzicoletta did everything to Tommy and his family.
Yeah.
To Rivs and the fam.
Shout out Caleb Schiff. Shout out Pizzicoletta.
Yeah. And so this just came out that they had made $49,000, a little bit over that.
Yeah.
And they're donating that to the family. And that he mentioned having made collectively from all their spots over 800 pizzas.
Yeah. Jeez.
And sold 180 gift cards.
Oh, man. Shout out.
Shout out Pizzicoletta. Yeah. Really jumping in there.
Yeah. What's inspiring about it, too, is I saw that Caleb also offered gratitude and thanks to vendors that helped support him as he led the effort in that cause. And he shouted out his staff and the employees that worked so hard to make all of that happen. Just a real example of our connection to others.
Yeah, no doubt. Shining example. So, huge shout to Pizzicoletta and the crew, to Caleb, to everyone who supported Pizzicoletta, everyone who contributed gift cards. And then I saw also that they're going to be giving pizzas to like first responders and people like healthcare workers and stuff.
Yeah. Shout out to them, and then best wishes for Rivs.
Yeah, no doubt. Best wishes to Rivs and the fam.
Yeah. And we'll include a link to his GoFundMe page on this episode. So check out the link. If you're not familiar with Rivs, go check him out on the IG. Just an incredible person.
Yeah, an icon, like you're saying.
Yeah.
I got a couple more shouts.
Yeah, let's have them.
I got to shout out Uncle Buckle. So Uncle Buck, local ultra runner.
Yeah.
Who DNF'd the last person standing race.
Yeah.
So DNF being a did not finish, and this is kind of a funny sort of thing because in this virtual race, this group from Phoenix, Air Vipa, they did this thing where every 15 minutes your person had to run a mile.
Yeah.
So Buck had to run a mile every 15 minutes. So it's just an interval. It starts over. If you run it in 5 minutes, you get 10 minutes to rest. If you run it in 14 minutes, you get 1 minute. And he got third place and ran for over 30 hours and covered 122 miles, something like that.
Incredible.
And he got shout outs from the person and the last two people and the person who won, because Buck was doing it all outdoors. The other dudes were on treadmills. So Buck was running through his neighborhood, doing a mile at a time.
Just knocking it out.
So huge shout to Uncle Buck. To me, that's a great feat to accomplish for a DNF.
Yeah. 122 miles around a block.
Through the neighborhood. Oh, yeah. Man.
Good for him.
And then lastly, we got to shout out Sydney Ritter's house, man. She hit us up and said that she liked the non-judgment episode and said that she loves the pod.
Shout out.
Dude, anyone who loves this,
good for them.
Good for them.
Yeah. That's the process of living non-judgment.
She is acting out non-judgment right there. Yeah. Dude, good for her. So, shout out at Sid Rit. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you sharing this with your friends and fam.
All right. Like we mentioned, we're going beyond flag today. So we're going beyond flag with T. Mark Montoya, Ph.D.
Ph.D?
Yeah.
Where from?
Harvard of the West.
Brilliant.
No, actually, he teaches at Harvard of the West. Sorry. He's from New Mexico State, I believe.
Hey, all right.
I think he did graduate work there. I'm not sure. But he is a tenured associate professor currently in ethnic studies at NAU.
Hey, Harvard. Let me finish. Of the West.
His teaching and research interests include the U.S.-Mexico borderlands, the borderlands pedagogy, the citizenship regime, ethnic studies, Chicano and Latinx studies, first-generation student experiences, DACA, and hip-hop.
All right, then.
Yeah, that'll get you.
That'll get you.
Dr. Montoya has a profound knowledge of how we develop inclusive groups that create exclusion, which may require some unlearning to understand why we fall into the pattern in the first place. Yeah. Deep stuff. Good stuff, I think. Yeah. Dr. Montoya has a wide range of interests outside of academia as well. He has an interest in a variety of music, saying he likes all form of music that he's ever heard, which is pretty remarkable.
So he's never ruled out anything?
That's what he says. Indiscriminate taste, this guy.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Non-judgment.
Yeah, non-judgment. He has a particular interest in hip-hop and identified Chuck D from Public Enemy as the greatest MC of all time.
Ooh. That's strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You on board with that?
Man. Well, I think my whole thing is that he's the most underrated MC of all time.
Yeah, that's your idea of him.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's fantastic. Yeah.
So, and he covers that. We'll get to learn more about his opinion of Chuck D.
Right.
His favorite book is Bless Me Ultima, written by Rudolfo Anaya. He's originally from New Mexico, but he's lived here in Flagstaff for quite some time. He's a real powerful mouthpiece for this area. So looking forward to hearing from Dr. T. Mark Montoya.
No doubt. You said a word earlier. I don't really know what it means. You said pedagogy.
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 Yeah, like being pedagogous.
Pedagogiousness?
I don't think that's a current conjugation, but I don't know why it couldn't be.
Super pedagogous.
Yeah. Being all pedagogous with your teaching.
Okay. I have to go to Merriam later.
It's a method of teaching. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the methodology around how we learn things. So it can mean in the classroom environment, but it also can just mean learning that occurs serendipitously or just in our day-to-day experiences.
All right. And T. Mark Montoya is all the way from New Mexico.
All the way from New Mexico.
I'm looking forward to having him in the Dun-Dun.
Yeah. Well, let's go beyond flag with
T. Mark Montoya. Welcome to Beyond Flag, a Beyond the Pines production, created by, with, and for the people of Flagstaff, building connection in the town we love. We are your hosts,
Dr. Daniel J. Phillips
and Cody Bayles, also known as Dr. Chinchilla Nice Nice. Thanks for tuning in as we go beyond flag, straight from the dunny of our observatory.
All right, here we are in the dunny.
I gotta say, it's so nice to be back in the dunny with another person that's not you.
Yeah.
Like, that feels great.
What does that mean?
It's just nice to switch it up a little bit, man. We've just been pounding out all these quick and nerdies.
Yeah.
And it was great to hear the Beyond Flag theme music again, huh?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So we're back into our interview format.
We're back in the interview format.
Which means everyone can look forward to the commercials.
Yes.
That get interspersed throughout.
We got some commercials going, some Craigslist ads, and we've been applying some CDC rules to this interview format, huh?
Yeah. So it's a little bit noisy in the background.
Might be noisy in the background.
Yeah.
We got doors open, windows open, the whole thing.
Yeah. And here we are sitting with T. Mark Montoya, Dr. Montoya, here, professor from NAU. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, we're stoked to have you. I'm stoked to have you. Yeah. So I'm excited to have you come in. I think a lot of what you cover as a professor in ethnic studies is so relevant. I think a lot of what's gone on in terms of the social injustice, the call of attention to social injustice, it's important that we carry on this message. I've worried a little bit that it'll be a flash in the pan, and some of the needed policy changes and environmental and cultural changes will go away if the message doesn't persist. So I'm excited to talk to you about issues that relate to some of that. So thank you.
Well, thank you again for having me.
Yeah, thanks for offering your time. So one area of interest that I really like about yours, Mark, is that you've covered hip hop, and you actually co-wrote a chapter that addressed finding information and knowledge in the content of hip hop and then teaching that in a curriculum. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. Yes, my colleague and I, Dr. Frederick Gooding Jr., who's now at Texas Christian University, had decided when he first got here to create a hip-hop course.
Yeah.
And the more we thought about it, we started thinking, no, you know what? We need two different hip-hop courses, a 200 level, which he taught, and a 400, 500 level, which I taught.
Nice.
And thought, this is a really good way to talk about some of these issues that are pertinent today through the lens of hip-hop via ethnic studies.
Yeah.
So originally the title was something along the lines of hip hop is the ethnic studies of music, or ethnic studies is the hip hop of academia.
Yeah.
And this is sort of that sort of reason why when we wrote the article, there's a lot of this critique of the academy, the critique of academia to a large extent as well, because it's a thing, hip hop's a thing that doesn't necessarily fit in, but is everything, if that makes any sense. Yeah. So a good way to think about it is when I very first time I taught the hip hop course, it was actually listed as a special topics course, special topics in ethnic studies, hip hop. And I had the students do a sign-in sheet. It was a way to taking roll, essentially. Yeah. And as I had them sign in, I asked them the question, what is hip-hop?
Yeah.
Right? So it's basically write your name and answer the question, what is hip-hop? Right? And the best answer I got was, I am. And I thought, wow, that is exactly what hip hop is. It's you, it's me, it's him, it's her, it's them, it's everyone, it's everybody. Yeah. So it really made for an interesting way to understand how we could talk about race and racism, the politics of hip hop, and look at it in a way that is digestible. Yeah. To a lot of folks who sort of understand hip-hop in a particular sort of way.
Yeah, there's so much content in lyrics, and often it's steeped in a certain vernacular or a slang or urban speak to where a lot of that depth could be missed. But you saw that depth and you thought we could incorporate this as a teaching tool for these things that occur and exist. You mentioned that academia has its own rigor. And so where did hip hop fit in with that? When you guys worked to establish the course or the content for the course, how did that go?
Well, we thought we were actually going to struggle. We really thought that we were going to get through curriculum committees and so forth, and it just happened.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of folks were eager to see this come to fruition.
Yeah.
And I think we both did a really good job with our syllabuses in putting them together and really explaining why this was really important to, again, furthering talking about race and racism in the United States, but also to sort of understand the power dynamics of why these issues exist in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And really, I mean, conscious hip hop, politically conscious, socially conscious, and so on, has been around for since the beginning, since its inception, essentially. So, and I think that's sort of the interesting thing about hip hop is that we have to also take into consideration that there are at least 5 elements of hip hop. One of them being the MC or rapping, and rapping actually precedes hip hop, if that makes any sense. So the spoken word and so on, there's been a history. I mean, since spoken word, since we've been speaking, there's probably been something socially, politically conscious about that. Just now, how does hip hop bring those things together to that degree?
Yeah. I was curious to know a little bit about the jump from the 200 level course to 400 level course. And are there different topics, or is it just more in depth? What differentiates those two?
So the 200 level course was titled Genius of Hip Hop. And the way we argued that we needed 2 courses is that his was methods, 200 level, Genius of Hip Hop, and my course, which was the 400, 500 level course, is called Politicizing Hip Hop, and mine was theory.
Okay.
So it starts with methods and it ends with theory.
Nice.
So that, and again, they took it.
Yeah.
The curriculum, all the various steps through various curriculum committees took it, and they're like, oh yeah, we'll absolutely do this. And our classes were full. I mean, we were having requests for overrides and so on, to the point I think that they actually added more seats, just found a bigger room for both classes.
Yeah. That's so cool. When you were first talking about that, I was thinking, man, I would have loved to be like a GoPro and just kind of watch what those initial committee meetings would have been like, and how they would have, whoever's in that room to talk about the content. I'm surprised to hear it didn't sound like it received a lot of pushback or anything. It sounds like it went through really well.
It did. I mean, that's how I remember it. Maybe I'm remembering it in a idealistic, sort of glorified kind of way, but no, that didn't seem to be the big issue in terms of getting the class pushed forward.
I think for me, it's surprising, and maybe it was this way. I don't know. I'd be really curious, because you did phrase it as you and Frederick expected more resistance or expected some difficulty in it. And even in the chapter, I was talking to you about this, you guys used the word stultifying, that academia can be stultifying, or that it has this paradigm that it can be inclusive and which pushes ideas out. And so even if there is knowledge inherent in hip hop, because that doesn't fit the certain paradigm of academia, that it wouldn't fit. So for me, the surprise comes from thinking, having spent a lot of time in academia as a student, there's this certain culture that exists. Did you expect the resistance because there's that culture of academia?
I think so. And I was going to say that stultifying, that was Dr. Gooding's word. So again, if, for folks who have the opportunity to read that chapter, you're going to see a clear difference between my writing style and his writing style.
I didn't find it in the Urban Dictionary.
Unsurprised about that.
But yeah, it really was a question of how we could fit this in, and it made the most sense in an ethnic studies epistemology, and an ethnic studies paradigm, essentially. So had we tried to create this, through a different field or discipline, it might not have necessarily gone through. So, and I think, again, a lot of that has to do with the idea of what academic rigor is. So for a lot of folks, hip hop ought to be fun. And for the same folks, academia ought not to be fun. And how do we sort of, again, make that connection whereby we can have fun and we can really learn and talk about very, very serious topics,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was mentioning to you some of my favorite hip hop artists and rap groups. So Public Enemy, my favorite hip hop group.
Mm-hmm.
Chuck D, my top MC, favorite rapper, etc. Probably the epitome, if you will, of conscious political hip hop to a very large degree. And listening to their first album, their second album, their third album, they just released another album just a few weeks ago as well. And what they're talking about in 87 is still relevant to this day, right? And again, it really makes for a good conversation as how we understand the issues surrounding Black Lives Matter, for example, the issues surrounding how we understand race and racism in the United States today, the fact that the Merriam-Webster dictionary changed their definition of racism just recently to really focus on the institutional, systemic part of racism as opposed to the individual, personal side of racism. And that's a big deal. I mean, just for folks to understand these particular issues in the way they do, because words have meaning, and they really can. Like I like to tell my students near the beginning of the semester, or not near the beginning, but at the beginning of the semester, is essentially to think of a word like a raindrop, right? It's kind of sprinkling outside right now, and you might go outside and get a couple of raindrops, and it's no big deal, right? But what happens when you put all this rain together? It can cut through mountains. Well, I'm not a geologist, but you know what I mean, right? It can do these sorts of things. So again, one word might not have a lot of power. Several words put together can, again, create a Grand Canyon, essentially.
That's powerful imagery.
That makes great sense. Yeah, we're really pumped to hear the homie Merriam-Webster is updating their language in their book.
Yeah.
That's encouraging.
Shout out MW.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I was really excited to hear you talk about Public Enemy. I grew up on hip-hop in a lot of ways, and I've always held on my most underrated MCs list Chuck D, because I feel like people would always talk about Pac, Big, Jay, Nas. Like, those are the best. Chuck D I never hear get talked about, but he's incredible.
Right.
And what you're saying is like his lyrical content is still relevant 20, 30 years later in a way in which it hasn't changed, and it still cuts to the heart of the issue.
Yeah, and it really is almost sad in a way how relevant it still is. To think about, we haven't progressed the way we think or pretend that we progressed in these kinds of ways. So whenever, again, you listen to some of these early albums and he's saying what he's saying, and then and I don't know who to attribute this to. It's not that racism has gotten better, it's that it's being filmed, right? So now people are seeing it in a way that they weren't seeing it previously, and you're like thinking, oh no, he wasn't lying, he wasn't making things up to just tell a story. He was telling a particular truth that people were like dismissing in a way that wasn't relevant to their lives, and it wasn't relevant to their lives because it wasn't affecting them personally. Right.
Well, and those are even the overt displays of racism that are being videotaped and seen. And then there's the systemic racism that is so much more insidious and people are much less conscious about. And it is difficult. You have to intentionally pay attention to capture that insidious systemic racism. And so those things are on video, but also the things he was singing about how systems operate still persist today and with little change to it.
Right. Yeah, and again, it's that sort of issue of him and other folks, him being Chuck D from Public Enemy, and other folks of that era, even folks that preceded him, really talking about a systemic issue, right? Yeah. And maybe not using that particular word, but you listen to the lyrics and say, yes, this is a good song. This has a good beat. I can dance to it and nod my head and so on. Yeah. And then I can also learn something. Yeah. So there's this old adage, hip hop saved my life. Yeah. And I've said it before as well, that had it not been for hip hop, I wouldn't be where I am today. Yeah. If that makes any kind of sense.
Yeah. So, just to put context to it, what do you mean by that for you specifically?
So Here's the story. So in, let's say my freshman year in high school. So this is 89, 90, right? And sort of the start of the golden era of hip hop as well. I'm laying on the couch and I'm with the remote control and flipping channels. And I stop on PBS because I see Malcolm X.
Oh, yeah.
And I only know Malcolm X as that guy in the background of the Public Enemy Fight the Power video, right? He's a civil rights leader. He's from the 60s. He was assassinated. He was more radical than Martin Luther King and so on, but just a very vague understanding of who he is. And here he is on PBS. Next thing I know, I'm on my third hour of this documentary on PBS called Eyes on the Prize, which was about the Black civil rights movement. And then the next day and so on and so forth. Fast forward to now my freshman year in college. I was in honors English. Honors English, not because I was a honor student. I scored high enough in my English SAT score to get into honors English. I was also in developmental math. That's how different those scores were. But because this was an honors course, it was a smaller course. Everyone seemed to have it together. We did our introductions the first day of class. Who are you? Where are you from? And then basically, what are you interested in studying? And so-and-so goes and is chipper and says all the right words, and I'm sitting in the back like, oh my God, I don't even belong in college. This isn't even my thing. Finally get to me, I introduce myself, and the thing I'm interested in studying, I say culture. Not knowing exactly what that means, but again, I think it's sort of that idea that, I want to study this thing, right? This thing that ends up being where I'm at today, ethnic studies.
Yeah.
I didn't have a name for it at that time,
Yeah.
but it really, again, it was this thing that saved my life, right?
The origin and the starting point was that Chuck D video with Malcolm X.
Right.
The Public Enemy video.
The Fight the Power video. And all it is a photo of Malcolm X on stage with their Public Enemy logo, and so on, and just the photo of him. Wow. I mean, it really changed that particular dynamic. So I say culture. The next class, I think it was a Tuesday, Thursday class. So the next Thursday, I don't even remember the instructor's name. She gives me a book. She says, oh yeah, I remember you saying you were interested in studying culture and identity. Here's this book you might be interested in reading. It's called This Bridge Called My Back, Writings by Radical Feminists of Color. And so right away, I get introduced to Black feminism, Chicana feminism, and so on. My freshman year in college, right? This is very backwards, and I'm not saying this in a negative way, but very backwards compared to a number of folks that I'm colleagues with. They don't get introduced into radical queer feminists of color until well into their graduate careers and so on. Here I am getting it my freshman year. And again, it was because when I sat there and I thought about what's going to sound smart, culture and identity, right? I could have said, oh, I'm interested in musicals, because I was too. I mean, that would, that could have been a whole other dynamic. So really, had it not been for hip hop and the politicization of hip hop, that's a hard word.
That's a tough one. No doubt.
It is. That entire trajectory could have changed dramatically.
Or if you would have had the confidence as a freshman in college to say musicals, we could have been speaking to a theater major today. Right.
Why not? Yeah.
So that whole thing right there, that feeling of like, I don't even know that I belong in college. I'm going to throw out the word culture here, set you on this trajectory to where you're here now, and have covered so many important topics. It sounds like. Again, I was really curious if we could just go back a sec. You mentioned methods versus theory. I guess I was wondering, can you speak to some of those methods? Maybe cover a theory or tell us a little bit about that jump. Hey, Dan, guess what?
What?
What's something that everybody does?
Everybody?
Yeah.
Breathe.
Good. Another thing that everybody does, we all drop that.
Oh, jeez. I guess you're right. We all do that.
Remember the book Everybody Poops? Well, guess what? We got a dual flush toilet here in Flagstaff, Arizona. How much you're wondering?
I would guess like $1,500.
Almost free. The post ID on this joint is 716-175-1524. I'll repeat that in case you're just writing this down. 716-175-1524.
Flagstaff Craigslist.
If you want this dual flush toilet, you can pick it up at the corner of Main Street in Dortha in Flagstaff's beautiful Sunnyside neighborhood.
For $1,500.
Minus $1,500. And this post will be removed when it's gone. So if you go to Craigslist, hit up that post ID or just type in dual flush toilet, Flagstaff, Arizona, nice.
We'll get you there.
If that post is there, it's yours.
Yeah. One quick question. What's a dual flush toilet?
Yeah, yeah. Go get them.
That's all you got.
To me, it sounds like two flush.
All right. go check it out. See, if you don't mind phantom flushing, sounds like this may be the rig for you.
Can be fixed, and it's the price of $1,500.
Minus $1,500.
It's yours. I guess I was wondering, can you speak to some of those methods? Maybe cover a theory or tell us a little bit about that jump?
Yeah, so I think the way, again, the way we would describe it to our students is that he would do the how,
okay,
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I would cover the who, what, when, where, which,
okay,
etc. So again, in the sense of methods, it was a concentration of how does one do hip hop, right?
Sure.
Whether it's through the various elements of hip hop dance, emceeing, graffiti, knowledge, and so on. Whereas I would look at now, what does this mean? Right.
Okay. Yeah. Focused approach. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was kind of wondering earlier. I think you just covered them. I was wondering what those 5 elements were, and then you get to that 400 level class, and you would really focus in your course. Did you really take a focus or emphasize Chuck D and Public Enemy and their work?
Oh yeah. So I probably talked way too much about Chuck D.
No way.
And Public Enemy.
That doesn't happen.
No. I mean, for a lot of students, again, I have to remind myself that. For students who were born now in, what is it? If they're, I'm really bad at the maths.
Oh, the generations?
Yeah. So if you have an incoming college student, they're born when in,
currently like 2002.
2002, right?
Yeah.
Right. So
Post
for
9/11.
them, for them, Chuck D is like, I don't know, the Everly Brothers for me, right? It's like that's
years.
A long time ago, so it's a completely different era where it makes a lot of sense to me, and for them, it's abstract, it's far away, it's oldies, essentially, for them. So that's where some of the difficulty I think came in terms of talking about it. But I'd spend an entire unit talking about Public Enemy, talking about those particular kinds of issues, and really trying to, again, ground their understanding of what they listen to as having a particular foundation. Because I could talk all about Chuck D I want to, and if I had Chuck D in the room, he'd say, no, you need to be talking about James Brown, and you need to be talking about Melly Mel, and you need to be, and so on. So again, it's sort of, how do we understand where the particular foundations come from? Because when I first established the class, which again is called Politicizing Hip Hop, the original title was Roots of Hip Hop. And the reason why I didn't stick with Roots of Hip Hop is because I'm comparative as opposed to linear. So to me, Roots of Hip Hop proposed a certain linearity to hip hop. So let's start with
at the beginning.
At the beginning, let's start with spoken word, and let's go here, and then let's go to 77 and right, and then Rapper's Delight, so on and so forth. And again, it didn't work that way because I think we learn comparatively. So in this instance, I could start off the class talking about, say, Childish Gambino, This Is America, right? It's relevant to this generation, it's a newer song, and then bring the connections to Ice Cube, or whomever.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking with this current generation, you have your work cut out for you because mumble rap. So hopefully you converted some of them from mumble rap.
It's interesting.
There's old Dan Tankerous. There he is.
To get back to Chuck D and Public Enemy, one of their most popular songs, "Bring the Noise." Yeah. It's really interesting because I actually talked about that, and I'm going to totally fumble it here because I'm not by any means an MC, but I feel like there's a couple of verses in that predates so-called mumble rap in the triplet form. When Chuck D's rapping, "Never badder than bad because a brother is madder than mad at the fact it's corrupt like a senator." So he's doing the da 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 da. You know, it's a triplet form, and it really is not too dissimilar to a style that's quite popular right now that folks refer to as mumble rap. So and I don't know, maybe I'm being too nice here, but I can appreciate it for what it is in the sense of, let me put it this way, tacos. Let me explain. So
I gotta lean in here.
Are we going?
Yeah, you just said my favorite word.
What's that Migos song about cooking?
Oh, there is, isn't there? Right. Yeah. But so you go to a number of restaurants now, and sort of Mexican or Latin fusion restaurants, and they have on their menu something called street tacos.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as street tacos. They're just tacos. They like, and you go to Mexico, you're not buying a street taco. You're getting a taco, right? Yeah. But what a street taco means essentially is an authentic taco, right? The soft corn tortilla, a nice protein in there, and all these kinds of things, as opposed to what a lot of Americans have in their head when you say taco. They think of a Taco Bell, a crunchy sort of. Maybe there's meat in there. I don't know what exactly it is.
It's like kind of meat.
Iceberg, lettuce, and so
tomato.
on. Yeah. And I tell my students, that's fine. You know what? Sometimes you just want some Taco Bell, but what's going to nourish you is Nana's tacos, the street tacos.
I can get on board with this.
So basically, this idea that when you're at the club and you just want to dance, it's okay, have your Taco Bell. But what's going to nourish you? What's going to make you feel good? What's going to feed you, your soul, your body, your mind? It's the conscious hip hop.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, and I'm not going to lie. Sometimes I'm just like, you know what? I just want a crunchy taco.
That's good. Yeah, I can get on board with that analogy now. So when you equate mumble rap, where it may be similar in triplets to what Chuck D did in rhyme format, but the depth of the content is drastically different.
Exactly. But then again, sometimes you just want the crunchy
Taco Bell
69-cent taco.
Right.
Yeah. No doubt.
Yeah, I just don't. So.
Old grumpy pants over here.
Yeah,
it's nice to hear someone take a positive spin on things.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Just real quick, before we transition a little bit, I was really curious. So beyond Public Enemy, who are some of the artists that you really gravitate toward, and who are some of the contemporary artists that are also sort of carrying that message or involved in the politicization of hip-hop?
So, I mean, when I started listening to hip-hop, I think I really started with Run DMC. So that was sort of the group I gravitated to originally, and then moved on to Public Enemy. I loved the Beastie Boys just because, I mean, I think everyone did of my age group.
Oh, yeah, guilty pleasure.
There as well. And again, their first album to their second album is a drastic change, like License to Ill to Paul's Boutique. I'm like, oh yeah, these guys are socially conscious as well. NWA, Ice Cube, but in terms of contemporary artists, someone like a Kendrick Lamar, Childish Gambino, and folks who are really stretching what hip hop is and can be for so many people, because you can listen to some Childish Gambino and you think, no, this is a Prince album, right? This is a funk album. This is an R&B album, but it's also very hip hop to a very large degree, and it's really a matter I think it's difficult for a lot of the younger artists because there's this sort of issue between commercialization of hip hop and the particular message that people want to put out there as well. Whereas previous generations of hip hop, I don't think were having that exact same dilemma with, making something commercial. How do we sell things? How do I sell a particular image as well? And I think what's a little bit sad, and maybe I'm completely wrong with this, is that we've moved back to an era of singles. So during the time where conscious rap was really big, it was all about albums, right? We're getting albums, we're listening to entire albums. Nowadays, it's like, well, what am I going to listen to on Spotify? What am I going to buy on iTunes? What's the one song I'm going to listen to over and over? And so you get a newer album, again, like a Kendrick Lamar, and you listen to some of the singles, and then you listen to the songs that weren't singles. You're like, oh, there's a difference here. Even if there's a tinge of politics in the single, it might not be to the same degree as the rest of the album. But I'm the type of person, because I'm trained as a political scientist, that thinks everything is political. So just Kendrick Lamar existing is a political statement to a large degree as well.
Can you unpack that a little bit? Like what you mean by that?
Sure.
Yeah.
So it's sort of this idea that our lives are involved in politics all the time, right? So folks who say, I don't want to talk about politics, I don't want to be political, are themselves making a political statement and have a particular privilege to not be political, without realizing that every aspect of our lives is based on a political nature, right? That we woke up at a certain time this morning, right? And our time is political, right? We live in Arizona that doesn't observe daylight savings time. That was a political move, a governmental move in that particular sort of sense. But in terms of how existence itself is political, is that folks can be political by just breathing and living, right? And I think, again, this goes back to this notion of Black Lives Matter, right? It for a lot of folks, it's a political statement, and you'll hear other folks say, no, all lives matter, or this and so on. I'm like, the point isn't being that some lives matter more or whatever. The point being is that we live in a system that devalues particular lives in a particular sort of way, and that existing in a way really does add a particular value. So I'll give you an example and see if this makes any sense. Is that my last name is a Spanish last name. I talked about tacos earlier, right? I didn't say tacos, right? I didn't say, that's just how I talk, right? I go order a taco, I get a burrito, I order an enchilada, and so on. But the one thing I'll always say correctly is my last name, because to me, that in and of itself is a political statement. To say, no, I am still something outside a particular norm for a lot of people, right? So Montoya is always going to be said correctly, but anything else, and again, it's sort of this idea of how our very existence itself becomes a political statement.
Thanks for clarifying that.
I think it's a great, I think what you're touching on now relates to some of what I read in your other work. So other work that you do, you have these other areas of focus, and two that stuck out to me in addition to how you addressed hip hop was you consistently addressing the borderlands, and then also with DACA. And I think those are really interesting. And when I was reading your work on the borderlands, I think it would be really helpful if you could define for us, particularly those of us living here in Arizona, define borderlands. You address the citizenship regime, which I think would be helpful to define, because I'm curious. Some of what you're saying is existence is political, but we have this way, if I understand correctly, we have this way of creating these in and outs. And all of this plays in, so we can say we're not addressing something or we're not being political, but there's this consistent in and out, particularly on the borderlands and with the citizenship regime.
Yeah, for sure. So,
hey, you know what would work good on those cold monsoon evenings?
Maybe some hot rocks.
Some hot rocks?
Yeah.
What are those?
So we build a fire and then you put rocks next to it, and then once they heat up, you use those.
Like in your socks, or?
Well, like sleeping bag between your legs.
You've been sleeping outside lately. So I'm mostly just talking about those cold monsoon nights in town.
I guess based on your reaction, you're probably not referring to hot rocks.
No. Oh, I'm not talking about hot rocks.
What you got?
Those are a great strategy if you're out camping or
Yeah.
if the missus has kicked you out for the night.
Yeah.
Either or. What I got for you is a faux fur jacket.
Faux?
Faux
So
fur.
we're not real animal fur.
Yeah.
Okay.
Faux. F-A-U-X.
Faux. F-O-E? Okay. Break it down.
F-O-E. A faux fur jacket.
Okay.
What I got for you is a vintage, but like new in terms of condition, jacket. How much would you guess for this?
Well, if it's vintage, I'm thinking thousands.
Thousands.
Tens of thousands. Well, it is faux. 1,000.
Tens of
$1,500.
thousands. It depends. So if you get it from Craigslist ID number 716-18000-866, it'll cost you $40. If you hit us up, there'll just be a small mediary fee. It'll cost you around $1,040.
Okay.
So you can choose.
Yeah. If I was any reasonable, rational person. Rationable? Jeez. So if I was a rational human being, what I would do?
Yeah.
I'd probably hit us up. I'd go straight to Instagram. I would go beyond_flag DM, and I would say, get me dams.
Give me dams. And
Yeah.
then you get us a small check for $1,040, and we get you a faux fur jacket, size 14. So there you go.
There you go.
Get dams.
I often jokingly introduce myself in academic settings in a particular way. It's this. I'm a recovering political scientist who teaches ethnic studies, studies the borderlands, and publishes in education journals. So I am interdisciplinarity defined, essentially.
Yeah.
And what I'm getting at here is this sort of idea that we live as human beings in these vague, undefined zones. And these vague, undefined zones are borderlands. And borderlands and studying borderlands is very different than studying borders. So a border is that physical line that separates something, right?
Yeah.
So the border that separates the United States from Mexico, or the border that separates Finland from Russia, right? That's that line. But then you have this vague, undefined zone where people might not be exactly Finnish, but they might not be exactly Russian, right? And these zones can sort of go much further than just geopolitical zones and can include racialized identities, Mexican-American, right? So that hyphen itself becomes a borderlands. I'm not Mexican, but I'm not fully American based on this concept of the citizenship regime, of the us versus them, and so on. And again, this becomes now a larger international relations theory sort of question, or sexual zones, gendered zones, class, and so on. And again, people are navigating multiple borderlands as what it means to be this and that, and what's that sort of, again, vague, indeterminate zone that people are navigating. I don't know if that answers.
It does. It does. It's these margins exist essentially, and I think it's really powerful for you to describe that it doesn't just exist on a geographical scale, and it doesn't just exist right where that physical border is. There's this area that approaches the margin, and then you can actually take for me, it's easy to think about it as that geographic representation can just be analogous for many other ways this plays out in identity formation.
Right.
And you mentioned the citizenship regime, if I understand correctly in your writings, is basically if we talk about the border between one nation and another, the citizenship regime is focused on defining who's a member of one country versus another country, and it's based on it defining that and delineating this person belongs here or doesn't.
Right. So yes. So the citizenship regime itself is very legalistic.
Yeah.
Right. It's based on this notion of the nation state. Nation state system. The Westphalian nation state system is only 370 or so years old. So in terms of history, how we understand countries and so on is very new.
Recent.
Yeah, very new and recent concept, because citizenship is tied to the city, right? Citizenship, right?
Yeah.
The city state, and so on. So it's a difference between membership, which is now how we define citizenship, and belonging, right? So I take what folks call a cultural citizenship approach to say that, again, we need not look at this notion of membership, but the notion instead of belonging. So when we look at issues, say, of migration to the United States from Latin American countries, prominently here in Arizona from Mexico, then we see this notion of folks not migrating, but belonging to an area they've always belonged to, right? As indigenous folks, as people who have moved and migrated since humanity has existed, essentially. This is why it's not surprising to know that there's an indigenous language in California that is very similar to an indigenous language in Peru, because folks have been migrating well before this concept of the U.S.-Mexico border in 1848, and which is, again, really not that long ago. That's 3 different generations, and you think, oh yeah, that's historically
not far away.
So I think that becomes that particular difference. Now, when I talk about cultural citizenship, and when I sort of look at rethinking and redefining citizenship, it's not a popular thing, right? People are like, no, citizenship exists. It's legalistic. This is what it is. Stop muddying up the terms, right? And I'm like, well, that's the whole point, is that we have to, again, unlearn what we've learned and rethink what we've thought in the past, and to understand there are larger systemic, institutional, historical issues tied to how we understand things as they exist today. So when somebody says to me, for example, well, what part of illegal do you not understand, when they're talking about migration?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, who gets to define legality, who gets to count, and who doesn't count, and so on. These are the questions that I have, right? And that's what the citizenship regime is this idea of folks having the power to define who belongs and who doesn't.
Yeah. Well, I was just kind of thinking, I was like, I wonder what it is that when people say something like that, like what's going on internally for them to say something like that to you? And then you just said the word power. And I was like, to me, like all of this stuff seems to revolve around power. I guess I was wondering, in your studies or just through your readings, that kind of thing, what do you make of that?
I mean, it's real. Again, this is the basis of politics, as I understand it. So again, I'm a recovering political scientist.
I was just going to call you out on that.
And the sort of idea that for a lot of folks, political science is a study of governments, and that's good. There's nothing wrong with that, right? That's really important work that people are doing. I like to look at it as a study of power, who has it and who doesn't. Now, governments fall under that particular umbrella, but it becomes much more of this issue of power, so that we can talk about, if we look again at say our Congress, right? And we look at the ethnic, racial, class, gendered, sexual makeup of Congress, and we see how it doesn't look like the rest of the United States. right?
Yeah.
And we like to say we're a representative democracy. And you start to think, wow, is this really representative of the United States, right? Rich, white, privileged, able-bodied. I mean, so on and so
Mostly
forth.
male.
Mostly
Male, yeah.
male kind of system. And so, we can criticize other governments, Cuba, for example, and say it's not representative, and at the same time not look back at this issue of power and control, power and knowledge. Who has power to define the rules and who doesn't? Who gets to say what is legal and what is not?
Yeah, when you write about this in your papers, you actually say that sometimes these topics can be, if I understood, that it seems like either students or faculty or both can be cautious in addressing these topics for fear of touching upon something either too controversial or upsetting something that has come to be a well-defined category, even though just 3 generations ago it wasn't. Is there caution in addressing these topics in an academic setting, and if so, why is that?
I think the caution comes to the idea of understanding that what we're trying to do, particularly in ethnic studies, is undo 500 years, right? So let's say that 500 years is, or more than 500 years. Let's say that 500 years, and then some is 1492.
Yeah.
I'm just throwing out a date out there, right? Just a
random
random date, right? Yeah, 1492, however long ago that was, right? And here we are in 2020. But ethnic studies as a discipline has only been around for about 51 years. So trying to undo 500 plus years of learning is going to be a very difficult process. So one thing that I try to do is have patience with people. There's a quote, and I'm probably going to get it completely wrong, and hopefully I'm not attributing it to the wrong person, but I think it was Malcolm X saying something essentially to the point of, don't forget that there was a time when you didn't know what you know now, right? And in other words, there has to be some patience with some aspects of learning and unlearning in our world. So if somebody doesn't agree with me, it doesn't mean they're a horrible person, or somebody, attacks me because they think I'm wrong or whatever. I'm like, well, the point is to be patient, to say, no, you're just not at that point where you understand this yet. You're over here. Hopefully I can get you to this other point as well. And then hopefully I can continue to learn as well, so that I'm not just stuck in my point either, right? Again, to understand complexities, because it really is a complex world that we live in. So again, I don't know if that sort of addresses that particular question, but this idea that there has to be some patience in talking to students about their worldview and their understanding, right? One thing that I do in my classes is show them a map of the world. And I'm sure you've seen it on the internet, but the difference between the Mercator projection and the what's the other projection? I can't even think of what it's called now. Peterson projection or whatever it is.
I don't know the name of it. Are you talking about the sizes?
Yeah. So they're like relative sizes of countries and so on. And you look at something and it's like, how do you make a globe flat? It's very difficult. And because of this, we start to see things in a particular way, and we start to see the United States as much bigger than it is, and Greenland as enormous, right? And Greenland, like, there's like what? 50 Greenlands can fit in Africa, but it looks the same size in a particular projection. So I remind them is understand that what you've learned can be a projection of the reality. Now, how do we get to a different reality? Not to say that you're completely wrong, but understand that there's a multitude of ways to visualize the world.
To promote learning for all of us. And I think for me, one of the points I'd highlight in what you said is, also, when I'm listening to someone and I have an idea about something that I'm trying to convey to that person, that I'm also trying to take in what they're saying. And even if I help them to understand something I feel like I understand in a different way than they do, that I need to continue learning as well. That, it's not some point you reach and stop.
Yeah, 9 inning ball game with no finish kind of thing, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it just keeps going. I really value what you were saying about patience there. Just having this conversation with a friend, just about everything that's going on, right? And trying to become even further in my own education on race and anti-racism. And like, there's this part of me internally, it's like, we got to fix this now, which I think is true. But then I'm like, I got to fix this now so like my kids can continue that, so that their kids can continue that. To me, just like you were saying, like 51 years of ethnic studies in the context of a 500 year of unlearning or something like that. Like it takes a while to do these things. Yeah, that just really stuck out to me in that way. I was curious about your work and then just connecting that to DACA.
So I'm part of a organization, a non-profit organization here in Flagstaff called the Northern Arizona Dream Fund. We're incorporated, so we're nonprofit. We do all the things legitimately, and as part of this Northern Arizona Dream Fund, what we basically do is find rich people, and we raise money from them so that we can pay for local DACA deferred action. Oh wow, I should know this. I should have it memorized. Can someone look that up for me? What DACA stands for? Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, I believe. I think that's it. And for folks applying for DACA, it's a $495 fee every 2 years, and the check's made out to Department of Homeland Security. So here I am on one side, in the academic side, criticizing the citizenship regime, which the Department of Homeland Security represents at its fullest level, and at the same time don't want to be the person that says no to the young dreamer who says, can you help me pay for my reapplication? Oh no, because the citizenship regime is bad, and blah, and so on. So it becomes a very interesting and difficult process. So basically what we do again is raise money to pay that $495 application, or right now, new folks can't apply, so it's folks reapplying. So the $495 reapplication fee, right? Wow. And you think about that, I can raise, and I'm not a good fundraiser, but let's say I could raise $1,000. That's only going to pay for two people, right? Jeez. Right, and that's a lot of money. So it's this idea of how do we help them, because as we can probably figure out, is most folks who are DACA eligible themselves are not coming from a privileged situation where they just have a spare $500 laying around
every 2 years,
right now. And again, every 2 years. So we started raising money for local DACA recipients, and we worked with different organizations that were helping migrant families in Flagstaff, and they knew that we were raising money, and all we were saying is, give us, because we had to have it, your name. We'll go to the bank. We'll go to the credit union. We'll cut the check to the Department of Homeland Security. Everything's legit because we're a nonprofit, so we have all our paperwork and all the law in order and so on. We're not doing anything beyond that. We have bookkeeping, record keeping, and those sorts of things. And what started happening, very interestingly, is that the young folks started to see it as almost like a scholarship. So instead of just saying, hi, my name is Danielle so-and-so, and I'd like help with my DACA application, they were writing letters to us, full-on letters. And again, these were handwritten letters, pencil, paper with, college rule and all that, because these are kids. These are kids. And, I'm sorry that my parents didn't do this the right way, but I don't know Mexico. I don't want to, I can't imagine doing this, and I want to be a good citizen. I mean, they were using all these terms. And here we are with a bunch of basically application letters that we didn't ask for, right? Mm-hmm. We weren't asking for any of this. And I told one of my colleagues, Dr. Von Luna, that I'm like, we have a wealth of information. On the one hand, we're a nonprofit. On the other hand, we're also academics. We should see what we can do with this. And then I said later on to her, no, let's not do this. This is horrible. This is a horrible, like, it felt exploitative. Yeah. It felt exploitative and so on and so forth. And then I started talking to the DACA recipients, and they're like, tell our story.
Yeah.
Tell our story. Please tell our story. And again, it was one of the most rewarding and heartbreaking things that we did with this particular DACA article, because what we did was analyze and code, and this is all sociology, and I'm a sociologist. That's why Dr. Luna did all that part and so on. But to tell their story and to tell their story in a way that was, we made everyone anonymous, but in a way that really, I think, put a human face to what people understood as an abstract idea.
Yeah.
That these are your neighbors, these are your coworkers, these are your friends, these are your kids' friends, they go to school. And to even sort of move away from the so-called good immigrant narrative as well, to say, and these are human beings that themselves might make mistakes and might not do things right and might have trouble in school and so on, but they deserve this chance, right? I think that ended up being the title of that particular DACA paper. I need this chance to help my family.
Yeah.
And it was this sort of idea that most folks who are writing these letters to us were not seeing themselves as individuals. They were seeing themselves as something larger, starting with the family, but even a larger community. And this is what we started, where the coding started happening. We're like, oh, we're seeing family, we're seeing community, we're seeing these words in this sort of way that, again, will tell their story because they wanted their story told. Had somebody said, nope, I would have been like, throw this away, we're not doing this particular article. But I think most of them were, or all of them were, grateful that story was being told.
And then when you guys did the qualitative analysis, that's where you really came to realize that it's not even that they were emphasizing how much it would hurt them, but they were talking about the benefits they wanted to provide for their family. Exactly. And again, it really changed that dynamic of how we understand, because again, we talk about issues of race and racism. There's this tendency to look solely at the individual level, right? That's racial hatred. This person doesn't like that person because of their race. That's racial hatred. It's very different from racism, which is this larger systemic issue. And what we're seeing with DACA students as well is that they weren't looking at, help me. I need to go to college. It was like, help me to help my family, to help my community, to help these larger sorts of issues. And it really, again, changed this particular dynamic of the individual versus the structural, systemic, community level. Yeah, to me, this is such a powerful application for what you've been talking about, both related to the borderlands and related to hip hop, that we create these ideas of things. And often it'd work best if we just reflectively listened to one another a little bit and tried to unlearn some things that have become solidified margins for us, and then understand there's much more similarity than there is dissimilarity.
Right. So I know this is a podcast so no one can see this, but imagine, if you will, a $1 bill. Yeah. Right? And you have that $1 bill in your hand, and what's that? George Washington, right? Yeah. And imagine a $20 bill. We'll say as a society that the $20 bill is worth more. Why? Because we put a particular value on it. Yeah. We say that it takes 20 ones to equal the $20 bill. Yeah. But imagine you're holding those in your hands. Is the $20 bill bigger paper?
No. I mean, they probably cost literally the same to make. Right.
It's not better paper. It's not bigger paper. Yeah. It's the same thing, right? Yeah. It's us as society putting a particular value on that piece of paper. And this, again, has a lot to do with race and gender and so on. It's, but we're all biologically the same. We're on an operating table and we're a human being, right? Mm-hmm. Now it's a value that people place on, this person's black, this person's white, this person's Asian, and so on and so forth, when the actual structure of it is the same thing, right? But the value increases and changes. And then again, that has a particular analogy to how we look at and value people's lives as well.
Yeah. And I think it'd be important to point out with that analogy, when you look at a $20 bill and a $1 bill, you're aware of how you are placing different values there. But racism and systemic racism is so insidious that those values are being placed without us always being aware of it. And what you're really saying here is we actually need to catch ourselves doing that, to try and pay attention to that.
Right. Yeah, because
unlearn it.
Right. Imagine somebody says, "Yeah, this costs $1," and you give them a 20, because you're like, again, what do you have to do? You have to pay attention. Like, oh yeah, I almost gave you the 20. Oops.
Yeah.
Going forward, I would love to hear your perspective on what it takes to unlearn these things.
Wow. So I had this article, Unlearning Racism, and so very surprisingly, I always assumed nobody ever read any of my work besides myself, my wife Katie, who does a lot of the proofing and making sure that it's readable.
Shout out Katie.
Yeah. Shout out Katie.
So that's cool. Your wife is interested in your work.
Is willing to do that.
So she's very willing to do it, and she does a great job with editing it and saying that, yeah, this is readable. I understand what you're talking about, or this is just a bunch of garbage.
go back.
Yeah, go no. And she's sent me back before. I mean, her red marks are harsh sometimes. Besides myself, Katie, and maybe the anonymous reviewers, I've never assumed, but this particular article hit 600 and something views.
I saw that. This is your most recent one?
Yeah, this unlearning racism. And I think a lot had to do with the title, and just when it came out. It came out right. It was published right in the middle of
social unrest.
Yeah, the contemporary social, I don't want to say contemporary, the continual social unrest that was more highlighted much more recently as well. And it's not really a guide or a how to unlearn racism as much as, again, it's this understanding of how we can rethink the world that we live in. So an example, and I can't remember if I put it in this article or it's a different one, or maybe I took it out because everything sort of blends together, but I had this example of teaching borderlands in the classroom. And one thing, again, going back to the issues of maps, I show my students a map of the U.S.-Mexico border. And then later on, and I talk about the border, 2,000 miles long, half of it, the Rio Grande, is a river. The other half is an irregular line that's in the desert, and so on. And most people can visualize that. And then sort of the next slide I show them is the exact same map, but it's upside down. It's flipped. And students are like complaining, like, "Oh, this is upside down. Your slide's upside down." And I'm like, "Let's talk about this." And the reason is because they've learned something that they want to fix it. Their mind wants to put it right. And I say, well, sometimes, what do we know? Why is it right one way but not the other way? It's the same border, right? So again, it's a sort of understanding of how we need to unlearn things by rethinking the reason why they exist in the first place. So it's maybe it should have been called rethinking racism, but that I'm like, well, I don't want to rethink something that needs to be abolished, essentially. So how do we understand where something comes from? We have to, again, understand the particular institutions, historical, systemic levels of analysis, ideological, and so on.
Those are so ingrained and intertwined.
It is so difficult, and that's the thing, is like when I teach ethnic studies, sometimes I might not necessarily use race or ethnicity as an example, but instead use gender. And because I'm already come off as a racialized ethnic minority in the United States as a Latino, but the issue then being is I live in a world where I can walk in downtown Flagstaff pre-quarantine, right? Pre-COVID, at 11 o'clock at night and feel relatively safe, right? I mean, I've just been ingrained in me, always look for your surroundings and be careful and so on. But as a man, as a male-bodied person, that I don't have to think about sexual assault, right? And that's the world we live in. Whereas more than 50% of our population could do that same thing and think, oh, I have to be now this extra step and extra cautious and so on, just based on my perceived gender alone. Right. So it's those sorts of things. Again, I can't teach people to unlearn sexism, but I can have them be very aware of that. Even me not having to care about that is part of a sexist structural.
Yeah, you can point them to what they've learned, and then it is up to people to unlearn it, or to take that thing, to take that flipped map and their discomfort with that flipped map and say, oh, yeah, I expected to see it a certain way, and it's actually the same.
Right.
Flip this other way.
Yeah.
What do I do with that?
Right. And if they're uncomfortable, they're doing it right. I mean, that's the thing is, but yeah, what can you do with it? And you can say, oh yeah, I can see it now. I can see what I need to see and understand that this is, again, political. Somebody has decided that, this is north and this is south. I mean, we're, again, I'm not
and north is up and south
right,
is down.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we start to develop even north-south discourses in terms of importance and so on. The global north, the global south, developed world, underdeveloped, so on and so forth.
What's powerful in that, though, is some of that is less threatening. And even there, I think that's what you were saying is when you put it into terms of and context of gender versus ethnicity, when people might be expecting something from you as a Latino professor,
Right.
ethnic studies professor, you actually make it less threatening, so they open themselves up to take that in.
Right.
And sometimes we're so closed off because we anticipate the controversy of something.
Yeah. And it's very purposeful. So again, I think back to a conversation I had with a colleague, Dr. Joel Olson, who passed away several years ago, of an white abolitionist scholar, anarchist. I mean, talk about, a particular level of understanding the world. And we had a conversation about racism, ethnic studies, and teaching sort of race-based kinds of courses. And the conversation was essentially, is it easier for him as a white guy or me? And I said originally it was easier for me because I have a minoritized identity that allows me to speak to a particular issue. And he's like, no, Mark, it's easier for me because as a white guy, people are going to see me as neutral and objective. Yeah. And you walk into a classroom and you're another minority complaining. You've already, and I'm like, of course I couldn't even win an argument with him there. And it wasn't an argument, but it was more of a conversation. But the point that he was making was this sort of idea that I could say the same thing in the same way that he said it, but again, he would be neutral and objective. I'd be another minority complaining, and therefore I would lose more than half of my students just by opening my mouth. And therefore, the reason why I often very purposely change the context and talk about something else so they can say, oh, now I see that he's not being biased. He's telling a truth in a way that affects him very differently than it affects me, right? So like I was recently telling Katie the other day that I like to go on a walk every other day with my dog, and I told her I wouldn't walk if I didn't have a dog. If that was that, I would be nervous if people would see a Latino man walking around a neighborhood. And she's like, what? And she's like, oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, it didn't necessarily faze her that I take into consideration that me just going on a walk, I had to think about, do I want to be this guy on a walk in this neighborhood that has no business essentially walking, unlike when you're with he's walking his dog. That's nice.
That gives the narrative to it, which is so many people's experience of minority ethnic backgrounds across the U.S. is those thoughts. Whereas for me, I wouldn't have that thought whether I was with the dog or without the dog.
No, it's just going on a walk. Right.
Well, so much of this is so profound. I could keep going with this. Just as a heads up, DACA is deferred action for childhood arrival.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I will never forget that now. But
yeah, I let you down in the moment.
It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah.
But yeah, so local folks that are listening, we have a Facebook group. Just type in Northern Arizona Dream Fund. We have a GoFundMe, $5, $10, $500. Anything helps. And again, we're nonprofit, so I'm not making any money off of this. It's all going directly to local dreamers.
Yeah. And I'm glad you shouted that out. So it's the Northern Arizona Dream Fund, and is the best resource then the Facebook group?
That and the GoFundMe page, which they're all kind of linked together.
Okay.
Yeah. I again, we're nonprofit, so we didn't want to develop a web page and do things that were going to cost that were going to cost money. It's usually just word of mouth, and the nice thing about Flagstaff is that in many aspects we're a tight enough community where folks are talking to other folks and they feel safe contacting us as well to, again, cut a check on their behalf, because it's a very scary process to know now that Department of Homeland Security has their name and info, but they're going to have their name anyway. It's just us being the middle person cutting the check for $495.
Well, thank you so much. So shout out to the Northern Arizona Dream Fund. Thank you so much for your time, Mark, and it's been a blast.
Well, thank you for having me. This is awesome. It's nice to put on some clothes today and not wear the comfy clothes and comb my hair and wear my wedding ring first time since March, I think.
Dressed up way more than us.
I was gonna say you're the sharpest looking person I've seen the last 3 or 4 months.
Well, I appreciate
without a doubt.
I was worried there might be some Instagram photos, so I wanted to make sure that I was prepared for that. And I know you're on Instagram and
my moniker
kind of on Twitter.
Is, #Instagramless Dan. Yeah.
Did you hear what Mark just say about Twitter?
He's one of our followers. You're one of our 6 followers.
Yeah, I was your first follower.
Yeah.
I don't think
Twitter
you. Yeah, I don't think you followed back until maybe a couple of weeks ago.
No,
that sounds about right.
Looked at it until
we have
a couple weeks ago.
real slack approach to Twitter right now. It's embarrassing.
You have to be posting at least 3 times a day to be on Twitter. Yeah, to be considered anything.
I might need you to give some notes to Dan over here. Yeah, no doubt.
We're getting there. Well, thank you so much.
Thank
for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Yeah.
All right, back in the dun, man. We just walked Mark outside. What a good time it was to have. For me, it was so good to be back with someone doing an interview.
Yeah. Well, you made it clear early on that it was nice to be back with someone other than me to do the interview. Mm-hmm. And after sitting with T. Mark Montoya, I actually agree, and probably more so than you.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there. Yeah, I see what you're saying. So we both feel the same. We both feel like we're happier than the other person that we had someone else to be with. Very good. Man, what an interview. For me, that was so much fun. I heard you say this at the end of that time that you felt like we could have just sat here forever. Yeah, I legitimately feel that same way. Particularly talking about all 3 of those things. We were talking about hip hop, borderlands, and DACA. All of those things are just so relevant and interesting to me, particularly Mark's voice on all of that.
Yeah, I kind of got hung up on what he introduced about unlearning. Yeah. And he quibbled about whether that was the proper use of the term in his title, and acknowledged that he thought about what title to use. And I actually thought, that's the thing. For me, I almost relate it to like having a beginner's mind in mindfulness. Like we need to let go of these things that have been well defined, because we fabricated much of that. Whether it's a boundary that we identify as a border, that's fabricated. Or about a definition of gender, ethnicity. Those are all fabricated definitions.
All this stuff is just made up.
Constructionism.
Like the dollar bill example he was using. All this stuff powerful. Is just, made up.
Yeah, I thought that was powerful for me because literally they probably cost the same to make. Yeah. So it's easy to use it as a representation saying, we apply different values to these, and they're virtually the same thing. Yeah. But also they're values that relate to money and economics, and economically they cost the same to produce. Yeah. and yet one is of different value than the
that's
other.
staggering. Yeah, one just has a different number on it, huh?
Yeah, great imagery of that analogy of the money.
Yeah, that was super useful, huh?
Yeah.
You know, another thing that we talked about, I don't know how into this you were. I was really excited, but when we got into talking about hip hop, like, for me, that was super fun. I feel like I could just go off on that for days.
It was. For me, I was curious about you because you talked about growing up in hip hop. For me, I was really into punk rock and punk hardcore.
Yeah.
And then had these tangents into early hip hop. And then I came back around with like Mos Def. Like some of my favorite lyricists are Mos Def and Nas.
Yeah.
So I wondered, were the names he was dropping, was that a lot of what you listened to, or?
Yeah, you know, a lot of that was a little before I got into it, but stuff that I had gone back, because I got really into hip-hop, so really wanted to learn the history of it.
Yeah.
But Public Enemy was someone who I was really naturally drawn to. And like I was saying in the interview, was I really thought Chuck D is one of the most underrated MCs.
Yeah.
Lyrically, everything that he does is so good. And you never really hear him talked about as being one of the best to do it. And I think he needs to be in that conversation in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And then I remember you were talking about like conscious hip hop, and I would associate Mos Def with that.
Yeah, Black Thought. Yeah.
Yeah, Black Thought, exactly. And that
Black
was kind
Star.
or Black Star. Well, but I would think Black Thought from the Roots too would also fall into that.
Yeah.
And so
the Roots, yeah.
Yeah, like
they were the house band for all of that.
Yeah, and so for me, like that was kind of where my entry point into hip hop was more the mid '90s, and kind of middle late '90s, like Wu-Tang and Gang Starr, KRS-One, some of those groups, Tribe Called Quest. But yeah, when he was talking Run DMC and Public Enemy was someone who I had gone back to be like, I got to know the roots of where this stuff came from. So I went back there for sure.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I like that because it, you know, hip hop can be dismissed. It can be viewed as not a lot of substance to it, and yet it really does have a commentary. Like even me, I have a hard time with mumble rap. Yeah. But it really is a commentary on what is appealing to that generation right now. Yeah,
certainly. That was why when we were talking, I thought when it got brought up to be a course in college, that it would be its own course. I was like, I couldn't imagine that people would take that seriously. Yeah, so I was really impressed that he was saying it was really well received, and it doesn't surprise me that students were totally
interested
gravitated.
In it. Yeah. Because that's what it is. The interest and appeal to some of that, when things have that level of mass appeal, is because it's speaking on a level that aligns with what people's experience is.
Yeah.
And hip hop has that. So when I was reading through the papers that he has written, I saw hip hop as actually a really engaging way to approach the more complex ideas that he writes about when it comes to the borderlands. But basically it all comes down to these in and out groups and everyone trying to hold the power to define who's in and who's out.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, really relevant stuff. Yeah, you know, another thing from the interview that really stuck out to me, and I feel a little bit ignorant about this, but I had no idea that there was a Northern Arizona Dream Fund.
No.
And so hearing him talk about that and the work they were doing, I was really interested in that story he was telling about how people just naturally approached it like it was a scholarship.
Yeah, applying.
Yeah, that blew my mind.
Yeah. It's a little disheartening, honestly, because I don't know, they probably are just competing for resources that aren't available, which is a little disheartening. So shout out Northern Arizona Dream Fund. Go check it out. We'll include the link to everything on this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, good times.
It was great to be back in the dun
with someone else. Yeah. All right. Well, can you take us out by shouting us out?
No doubt. So hit us up on our website, www.beyondflag. Flag spelled?
FLG.
No doubt. And you can hit us up on Instagram, beyond_flag. We got stories, we got posts, we got questions, we got
snappies. Snap at our chats. Face blogs.
And if anyone has any idea on how to build a Twitter account, if you could just like send that to us.
Dan.
Message Instagram.
Tweet me.
Yeah. Twitterful Dan over there. Let us know how to build a Twitter.
Check out Twitter.
Hit us up. Dan's doing some work.
doing some work, losing them followers.
Yeah, we've increased our followership by -2 recently. Great job. Good stuff on our parts.
Check out Twitter. If it's that impressive that we lost 2, you want to see what's going on there.
Yeah. What was it that drove away 2 people out of 8? Oh man. At any rate.
All right. Well,
It's
have
been
a
good.
good one.
No doubt. Love yous.